plans, which is a very, very dangerous path to go down when regulators at the federal level can dictate changes to state law. And, I think that it needs to be much broader than just greenhouse gases and even much broader than just the EPA. To take even a further step back and look at the broad picture of what we face in terms of regulatory threats, FCC is going to, for the first time in history, regulate the internet starting December 21st. They're adopting net neutrality regulations. The National Labor Relations Board is going to attempt to accomplish card check by the back door by doing internet voting, where the union guys can show up at your house and say, hey, let's go online and vote for the union. We've got every agency in the federal government right now being tasked with how can you accomplish a far left agenda, all of these objectives. And the states can go a long way towards pushing back on that. I know that Peter Glazer earlier this week presented his model resolution on EPA, which I think would be very beneficial to have states telling their congressional delegations, you need to stop what EPA is doing. I think we need to have similar pushback on all of these other regulatory agencies. And fundamentally, we've got a very powerful argument here. First of all, the economic argument. Total federal regulatory compliance costs this year, according to Obama's own Small Business Administration, are $1.75 trillion. For small businesses, this is according to SBA, for small businesses, federal regulatory compliance in 2010 cost $10,500 per employee per year. $10,500. And they want to layer on all of these enormously expensive rules, the most expensive rules in history, on top of that burden. I think we need to have a regulatory timeout. I think the states need to call for it. I think they need to say we need a long time to catch up with all of these enormous rules that have already been put into place. Don't cripple us economically in the middle of a very weak recovery with even more regulation. And I also think there's a political accountability argument that's enormously powerful as well. When you've got unelected bureaucrats trying to dictate policy to the elected branch of government, we need legislators, state and federal, to stand up for themselves, say legislatures make the laws in this country. And I think that if we drive public awareness, even non-binding, even just resolutions, I think are very, very powerful, because I fundamentally believe that if the public knows about what's happening in the regulatory sphere, the sort of fourth branch, if they know about it, they'll be outraged, and we'll have enough momentum to stop it. So I need all of your help in this fight, in this regard. We've got Americans for Prosperity chapters in many of your states. Even where we don't, there's some things we can do out of our national office to help on these fights. We want to work with you on this. We think that for the next 2 years, this is where most of the action is going to shift inside the executive, because they're not going to get bad bills through Congress. But the question is, what will they be able to do that people don't see, that people don't know about, and how effective can we be in stopping it? And I'll ask for your help in that fight, and I think that we've got a lot of great arguments on our side, and if we make them to the American public, we'll win. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, and I just want to say another, Kathleen White and I, as I said, have the lead article in the Inside ALEC issue right now on the EPA's environmental assault, and I urge you all to not leave today without taking a copy of that.
Thanks, Mario. I've got a lot I want to say in 10 minutes, and I think we're running maybe a little bit over too, so I'm going to be the fastest talking Texan possibly in history. I wish I could talk about our 7 lawsuits.
Press the on button on the mic.
Perfect. I wish I could talk about the 7 lawsuits we have against the EPA right now. About the time that the EPA showed up in Texas and told us they really like our permitting and now they don't like it so much. But I'll leave that for later. Mario asked me, thanks. Mario asked me, if you want to have a good read though, Google search fealty oath Texas versus EPA, and you will find a wonderful piece of writing telling the EPA exactly what we think of them. So anyway, I encourage you to go find that. Mario asked me to talk about the impact of federal funding on state budgets. I think that's because in my former life, I was with the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and they all got tired of my ranting about this, and misery loves company, so he wanted me to tell you all exactly what I think as well. Luckily for you, I do have 10 minutes to do this in. So at dinner last night, I was with some folks, and there was a girl who is a Texan and has apparently been in Washington, D.C. way too long. and asked if I was here trying to get more federal money for the state. And I laughed because I thought she was joking, and then she said that she was serious, and I reminded her that my boss has been just a little outspoken about this, and if you haven't heard him, you'll get a chance to hear that at lunch today. But she asked me a serious question. She said, what is the problem with federal money in state budgets? I don't really understand why that's a problem. And one of the like-minded folks that was with me said, well, you know, have you heard the old adage that nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as they spend their own? And he said that's why. And, you know, I think that applies a little bit here, but I think that the problems are actually a little bit deeper than that, and that is just federal overreach into issues that are the province of the states. And I'm not going to try to trace the evolution of the law with these legal scholars on the panel, but I definitely want to highlight a 1987 Supreme Court case that I think is pretty instructive in a lot of ways, and has certainly been something that I just keep in the back of my mind in thinking about this. And that is South Dakota's challenge as to whether or not the federal government could withhold 5% of their federal highway money if they did not raise their drinking age to 21. And of course, in writing about this, the Supreme Court said that they were within their constitutional bounds in doing this, that they weren't violating anybody's constitutional rights by saying that you couldn't purchase alcohol until 21, and that it was a perfectly fine thing for the state or for the federal government to want to encourage states to have some uniformity in drinking laws across the country. But they have a couple paragraphs, and if you'll indulge me for a minute, I just want to read to you these and come back to these in a minute. The first is, they say, moreover, the relatively small financial inducement offered by Congress here, resulting from the state's loss of only 5% of federal funds otherwise obtainable under certain highway grant programs, is not so coercive as to pass the point at which pressure turns into compulsion. But they later say that is something that they have recognized, that there is a point where pressure turns into compulsion. And then in a later paragraph, they say, here Congress has offered relatively mild encouragement to the states to enact higher minimum drinking ages than they would otherwise choose. But the enactment of such law remains the prerogative of the states, not merely in theory, but in fact. So in other words, what they're saying is, don't blame us. This is only a little bit of money, and the states can always say no. And of course, we know that that happens all too infrequently. In a refrain that I'm sure is familiar in your states, you hear people talk about, we need to go get these tax dollars that are sent to Washington. That was a subject of one of the earlier panel discussions, and sort of the game theory involved there is states decide, I'm not going to go get my money back, so this is up for other states to take. There was a former Texas legislator who used to say that she always said this, of course, trying to advocate for expanding or creating new government programs, but her purpose was to go get those homesick Texas tax dollars back to the state. It's a nice sentiment, I'm sure. It strikes a chord with states that are donor states. The governor has talked often about how we do not get all of the federal highway money that we send up in our gas tax, and that means that the state has to find a whole lot of other ways to fund important things like transportation. But all in all, this makes it really hard for states to say no, and I'm sure that this is what all of the legislators in this room know firsthand is the case. There's this idea, of course, that the federal money is free, and we know that that's not true. But I've always been fascinated by the South Dakota case because I think that it's important that the court has recognized that there is a point where Congress hangs out this financial inducement, and it may be so coercive as to pass the point at which pressure turns into compulsion. So if 5% isn't enough, I just want to know what is enough. And I wonder what they would think about Medicaid. And Medicaid, as you know, is a budget buster in every state. A state that has the very smallest matching percentage in Medicaid spending still splits Medicaid costs 50-50 with the federal government. And of course, the way that works is you agree to run the program under all of the federal requirements, and then you come on bended knee to Washington and play Mother May I for an ounce of flexibility to run the program the way you need to. So, my question is, this voluntary program, which every state participates in, if 5% isn't coercive, is 50%. How about 60% or 70%? That's what we're talking about for many of these states with the matching funds. And the reason I think this is important is you might have heard a lot of the chatter about Texas getting out of Medicaid. And I think that that's a reflection on just how desperate the situation is for states. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the ins and outs of our Texas budget, but I will say that what we are looking at with the enhanced federal match that is that's going away. You may remember the stimulus dollars came into the states and said, we're going to temporarily give you more of a federal match for Medicaid. That goes away, and they reset the matching percentage anyway. We're looking at needing about $6 billion more dollars